Free trade and barriers to international trade. Free trade, in other words, the absence of governmental barrier to international trade, has been an integral part of most conceptions of free enterprise since the early 19th century. The reason for its centrality is that free trade is essential to securing the comparative advantages that are at the heart of efficiencies attributed to free enterprise economies. The importance of a free trade component to our cross-national free enterprise gauge is enhanced by the enormous domestic political pressure that globalization has produced on governments. Pressures from both domestic producers and workers have led elected officials to pursue myriad policies that restrict or enhance their international trade. Moreover, these efforts have varied across both trading partners and particular products. In this lesson, we discuss the dynamics of free trade and barriers to international trade. It follows from the previous slide that after studying this lesson, you should be able to define free trade, explain the reasons and demerits of protection, describe rise of new economies, explain the barriers of international trade. The main features of free trade are that the goods and services are traded without taxes. Trade distorting policies such as taxes, subsidies, regulations, etc. are absent. It provides free access to markets and information pertaining to them, and ensures free movement of labor and capital between and within countries. Free trade agreements or FTAs are generally made between two countries. Many governments throughout the world have either signed FTA or are negotiating or contemplating new bilateral free trade and investment agreements. Trade agreements may include commitments on topics such as improving intellectual property right protection, enhancing labor rights, government procurement, opening service sectors to competition, and enhancing rules on foreign investments. Examples of free trade agreement include NAFTA, that is North American Free Trade Agreement, and CAFTA-DR, or Central America Dominican Republic Free Trade Agreement. One of the most important features of international trading environment is the proliferation of trade barriers. Protectionism is the economic policy of restraining trade between states through methods such as tariffs on imported goods, restrictive quota, and a variety of other government regulations designed to discourage imports and prevent foreign takeovers of native markets and companies. There are a number of arguments put forward in favor of protection, which include infant industry argument, diversification argument, improving the terms of trade, anti-dumping, employment argument, national defense argument, etc. Despite these strong arguments, protectionism is known to be anti-globalization since it is against the interest of consumers, as it increases price and reduces variety and choice. It makes producers and sellers less quality conscious. It encourages domestic monopolies. Even inefficient firms may feel secure under protection, and it discourages innovation. Protection leaves the areas open to corruption. It reduces the volume of foreign trade, and protection leads to uneconomic utilization of world's resources. Now let us review 7 most common protectionist arguments and their rebuttals. The first one, military self-sufficiency, which claims that some vital military goods may be unavailable from other countries in time of war, and therefore a viable domestic industry is necessary for defense. One must suspect many such arguments when those making the arguments are the very firms supplying those goods. You can easily see how domestic industries might persuade the government to protect them from foreign competition. In presenting the case to the public and government, protectionists would not get very far if they were to argue in terms of their own private gains. Accordingly, most of their arguments assert that protection benefits the national interest. Many people say that we need to protect our economy against globalization because the expatriates would eat up the jobs we could otherwise do. It has to be remembered that the loss of employment in certain lines of work, which would undeniably occur with a movement to free trade, are due to the current absence of free trade. Then there is the diversification for stability argument, which has little application to our economy. It is often used for, say, Chile, which is heavily dependent on copper exports. The fallacy is that Chile has a strong advantage in copper production, and to forcibly diversify would be to pay clearly in opportunity costs. Individual entrepreneurs should make these decisions according to their own assessments. The basic notion of protecting new industry competing with established foreign firms until they can mature and compete toe-to-toe is still false. In effect, this suggests the substitution of government officials' judgment for that of private investors. This makes the baseline of infant industry argument. There are two versions of dumping. The first is selling products abroad at lower price than at home. But this is to be expected. Buyers are normally more loyal to domestically produced goods or other things held constant, of course, than to foreign-made goods. The only way to successfully sell to foreigners is therefore with price concession. Because of this loyalty factor, it would be strange if dumping was not the norm. Cheap foreign labor argument claims that workers should not have to compete unfairly with low-paid foreigners. The government interface with international trade for whatever motivation creates barrier to trade. These barriers can be in different forms, but they generally fall into one of the 5 categories as given on the screen. Tariff is a custom duty or tax on products that move across borders. Tariff rates for imports or exports vary from product to product and country to country. Generally, there are 3 kinds of tariff rates, which is specific duties, which is a flat sum per physical unit of commodity imported or exported. Ad valorem duties, which are duties levied as a fixed percentage of the value of commodity imported or exported, and commodity duties. When a commodity is subject to both specific and ad valorem duties, the tariff is generally referred to as compound duty. Non-tariff barriers are usually designed to deliberately tighten the foreign manufacturers' access to domestic market. Unlike the trade barriers, which are straightforward, the non-tariff barriers are non-transparent, or at best they are elusive. You must have certainly heard about import quotas and export quotas. A quota is an explicit limit on the amount of particular product that can be imported or exported during a specific time period. A quota may be applied on selective basis with varying limits set according to the country of origin, or on a global basis, which only specifies the total limit and thus tends to benefit more efficient suppliers. A voluntary import expansion, VIE, is an agreement to increase the quantity of imports of the product over a specified period of time. In the late 1980s, VIVs were suggested to Japanese by the US as a way of expanding US exports into Japanese market, under the assumption that Japan maintained barriers to trade that restricted the entry of US exports. Japan was asked to increase its volume of exports on specified products including semiconductors, automobiles, auto parts, medical equipment, and flat gas. The intention was that VIEs would force a pattern of trade that moved closely replicated the free trade level. A voluntary export restraint is a restriction set by a government on the quantity of goods that can be exported out of country during a specified period of time. Often the word voluntary is placed in quota, because these restraints are typically implemented upon insistence of importing. Now let us check if we have understood the various concepts discussed in this lesson clearly. NAFTA stands for National Agreement of Free Trade. Right or wrong? Wrong. Free trade agreements, FTA, are generally made between hostile countries. Right or wrong? Wrong. Free trade is a system of trade policy that allows traders to act and transact without interference from government. Right or wrong? Right. Before we end, let us briefly revise what we've studied till so far. This lesson lays out the scenario of international business. With the world economy becoming global, we have reviewed the main drivers of globalization that are thrusting nation-states towards a more tightly integrated global economy. This lesson has reviewed a number of theories that explain why it is beneficial for a country to engage international trade, and has explained the pattern of international trade that we observe in world economy. We've also discussed rise of new economies like Japan, Southeast Asia, and China as compared to India.